I'm sure you've sent a text to the wrong person before. It's just a part of modern life. We've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. Sometimes there are varying degrees of embarrassment that come with that. Obviously, if it's just a text, no big deal. If it's sensitive information and you send it to the wrong person, maybe it's a bigger crisis, right? Well, Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, released some military strike capabilities and plans a couple hours in advance in a Signal chat message he had with several other top administration officials. The only problem was there was also a journalist accidentally added to the thread who got all the classified information at the same time. So we're going to talk about that, although talk about a couple angles on it that maybe are less talked about. And then we're also going to talk about RFK Jr.'s war on getting cell phones out of the classroom, which I normally applaud, except that he's doing it for the wrong reasons. Okay, so let's talk about this whole Signal chat thing. Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic wrote this article. The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans. U.S. national security leaders included me in a group chat about upcoming military strikes in Yemen. I didn't think it could be real. Then the bombs started falling. So this happens a couple weeks ago, March 11th. He gets a request from Mike Waltz, who is Trump's national security advisor, and to communicate on Signal, which is an encrypted app. It actually is a really good app. I do like the app a lot, but it is not designed for government sharing of national security secrets or anything like that. So they start this thread and they're just coordinating who's going to be in this stuff. And they're still doing most of it offline in the secure stuff that the government's supposed to use for the actual details of this plan. But Jeffrey Goldberg does not think this is a real thing, potentially. He thinks maybe they're trying to trick him or something, or this is some sort of nefarious actor. And so he's just paying attention to it. This is March 11th. By March 13th, he gets invited to this whole group chat with all these people. Okay, so the people on the chat are J.D. Vance, Vice President, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who initiated the communication with Jeffrey Goldberg specifically, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff, and the White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, as well as Stephen Miller and Brian McCormick. Okay, so this is a lot of higher ups. It's like half of Trump's cabinet that is on this text thread, and they are talking about striking the Houthis in Yemen, who have been seizing ships and shooting missiles at ships in the Suez Canal over the other side of the world, and this has been causing shipping delays and all sort of economic problems. And Trump, the administration is correct that Biden did not handle it well, in my opinion. We should have gone after the Houthis more. We should have struck them more. This was actually, we had them firing rockets at U.S. ships. Okay, so this is like active war stuff. This is not, these are terrorists, right? And so Trump's going to be more hard on them. I'm fine with that, okay? But they're discussing this in this Signal chat all the while a journalist is reading every bit of it, not quite believing it, not sure what to know, what's real, what's not. But then I'm not going to get into all the details. You should read the full article. It's quite fascinating to talk about some of the details, some of the screenshots, some of the discussions. Sounds like J.D. Vance was a little less gung-ho about the plan, but was like, I'll go along with it if that's what the president wants to do, but I think maybe we should wait because of X, Y, and Z. There were some interesting discussions, interesting to see behind the curtain. But the problem is it shouldn't have been happening on the messaging app Signal, right? By March 15th, which is the day that these attacks start happening, I'm going to quote from the article here. It says, at 11:44 a.m., the account labeled Pete Hegseth posted in Signal a team update. I will not quote from this update or from certain other subsequent text. The information contained in them, if it had been read by an adversary of the United States, could conceivably been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel, particularly in the broader Middle East Central Command's area of responsibility. What I will say in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of the Signal conversation is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. So, by all accounts, that would be classified information. There's been fights today at a Senate intelligence hearing where Tulsi Gabbard and Mike Waltz were there. They kept asking, or it wasn't Mike Waltz that was there. It was the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, and kept asking them, okay, so what were the contents of the messages? You're saying there wasn't classified stuff. The Jeffrey Goldberg is claiming there was classified stuff in it. Which is it? They weren't answering directly. It seems like they're trying to sweep this under the rug pretty easily. And I'm just not sure that we should do that. So here's the thing about this story is that I don't think there's been a more black and white story about the Trump administration certainly not in this second Trump administration, because this is not Jeffrey Goldberg going after some scoop or having anonymous sources. He got accidentally invited to this group chat, under no volition of his own, by all accounts that we have. By the way, the White House and NSA have confirmed that this chat was real. Okay, so this is not some hoax, and that's what you're seeing in a lot of right-wing media, is they're trying to discredit Jeffrey Goldberg to say that, like, well, he's a hoaxer and he's a bad journalist. And so, well, I mean, you invited him. He did not seek this out. Okay, so I think it's as black and white a thing as we have in text, in screenshots, most of these details. Now, to be fair to the Trump administration and to Pete Hegseth, we do not have the screenshots or the text quotes from the parts that that Jeffrey Goldberg considered nationally sensitive, okay, that we weren't going to release. Even though this happens, the bombs start dropping 2 hours after Pete Hegseth sends this message out. And so it's confirmed that, like, this is really the people. They were really talking about these strikes. The strikes really happened as explained. And my point is that Pete Hegseth is saying, no, that's not true. We didn't discuss any war plans in the chat. Jeffrey Goldberg is saying it is true. I believe Jeffrey Goldberg because of one thing. He sat there and watched the bombs drop 2 hours later after he was like checking Twitter to see if there were bombs dropping in Yemen at the time that Pete Hegseth said they would be dropping. How would he have known to check at that time without the information? And so I think it's going to be pretty obvious. I'm sure Jeffrey Goldberg will just give this to the Senate Intel Committee and say, look, here's the screenshots. I don't want to share them with the public, but you guys are Senate Intel. Look, here's what Pete Hegseth said in the chat. So I think this will get worked out. But my point is, it's pretty black and white that they shouldn't have been using Signal in the first place. The thing is, there's a lot of hypocrisy here. So we could go back to just 2023 and we can see that Mike Waltz, who is the guy who leaked this technically, because this is a leak, no matter which way you look at it, this is private national security information that got leaked to the press accidentally, not on purpose, but accidentally. But that shouldn't really make a difference, right? People would be fired for this if they were lower than these levels that these people are. So, but just a couple years ago, less than that, this is June of 2023, so a year and a half ago, talk about double standard. Biden's sitting national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, sent top secret emails to Hillary Clinton's private account, and the DOJ didn't do a damn thing about it. No wonder Americans are losing faith in our justice system. There are similar quotes from Pete Hegseth talking about Hillary Clinton's email servers or even Joe Biden's storage of documents and things like that. So my point is there's a double standard here. And I think Americans feel this double standard really well. We all know that there's this two-tier justice system that happens if you are a senior person in the government and you do something negligent like this and careless. And keep in mind, the problem with Pete Hegseth specifically, in his confirmation hearing, one senator said, how can I trust your judgment? You cheated on your wife with another woman who got pregnant, and then you cheated on that woman with yet another woman in a hotel that accused you of sexual assault. And so I don't trust your judgment. Like, why are you, how am I going to trust your judgment? This seems like a perfect example of bad judgment by Pete Hegseth. The initial Signal chat, I'm still on the fence of whether it was okay or not. The CIA director is saying that the previous administration used Signal for work chat purposes as long as there were a couple conditions. One, I think, was that obviously no secure information is passed along. This is more for like coordinating meetings and things, but no classified information is stored in there. And I think the other one was that they keep the records. They don't auto delete. The problem with this Signal message, it was set to auto delete the messages. So it seems like they're using Signal as a workaround to not have their communications be able to be found out by journalists or us or Freedom of Information Acts. And that bothers me to some degree, although I understand that the government needs to use something like Slack in a work environment, and Signal is probably more secure than anything else they have for that kind of coordination stuff. And like I said, some of this conversation seems totally fine to have in Signal, although again, I think there needs to be clear lines of what senior officials in the government can use to communicate with each other, even for non-sensitive stuff. I think that there should probably be a paper trail of some sort that we can look back at. And this would not give that if they set the messages to auto-delete. There's also a problem with Signal in the sense that it is a very secure app. It's end-to-end encrypted, which means that even if someone hacks the communication, it's gibberish unless they have the encryption keys that are on your device. The problem is Russia specifically has a hacking group that has figured out some ways to spoof. There's a QR code that you can create inside the app so that you can sync your messages between, for example, your phone and your desktop computer. And Russia has found some ways to trick people into scanning that QR code and basically getting a second version of a copy of everything they're texting. Signal has, this is Google figured this out. And I think Signal has since tried to fix some of these problems, but no messaging system is perfect. Obviously, Signal is a really great one, though. But the point is, we need to know whether government officials can or can't use this for any purpose. But you certainly cannot say, hey, in 2 hours, at this time, we're going to strike this place, we're going to use these weapons, etc. If that was not Jeffrey Goldberg on the other end of, what if that was just a random citizen? What if that was someone that had ties to Iran and could warn the Houthis that these attacks were coming? That could have put our military, the people striking these, that could have put them in harm's way. So this is a serious thing, and it's kind of getting dismissed on the right as, well, it's just Jeffrey Goldberg and he hates Trump, and so therefore we shouldn't believe this. Look, again, it's a black and white issue. It should be covered, and we should be able to talk about there's a hypocrisy here. In my opinion, we should have prosecuted Hillary Clinton for setting up a private server for exactly this same purpose, to circumvent communications having to be known by citizens, by journalists, by whoever wanted to get those in a Freedom of Information Act later on down the line. And that appears to be what she was doing with a private server. And it did turn out that there were classified documents on those servers, which certainly people like Russian hackers or Chinese hackers would be potentially able to get a hold of. And here's the thing, Donald Trump did the same thing with the classified documents he took to Mar-a-Lago. Now, there's a slight difference there in the sense he wasn't trying to communicate something, but to some degree, Hillary's problem was worse because it could be hacked. At least you had to get on the premises of Mar-a-Lago and into those rooms where the boxes were to get those classified documents. But the point is, Joe Biden did this. Mike Pence did it to some degree. He had 1 or 2 documents after he left the VP. Of course, he found them and brought them to the people's attention and returned them. So I understand that it accidentally happens sometimes. But there's no one to blame. This was Mike Waltz initiated the chat. He invited a journalist into it. And then Pete Hegseth, according to the article, is the one that was sharing what were very sensitive pieces of information. And then there was apparently some more stuff that came in from the CIA and stuff. Again, we don't have the details of those. I hope that Jeffrey Goldberg will take those to the Senate Intelligence Committee and they can determine who's lying here. But my point is, it doesn't actually matter who's lying, because I think someone has to be held responsible for this. Because what we keep doing is, when Hillary Clinton did it, the Democrats said, oh, her emails. And they just tried to say this is not the big deal that Republicans are making out to be. And then when Donald Trump took his classified documents to Mar-a-Lago, again, Republicans now were the ones saying, this is not a big deal. He has the power to do what he wants to as the president. He can declassify stuff. And it was the Democrats, it was the left in outrage over Donald Trump doing this. And then same thing, we find Joe Biden has these documents in their garage and didn't know about them. Okay, so this keeps happening and we keep excusing it on our side if it happens. But the thing is, these are all, to me, proving that these people are not responsible enough with national security, and they're not responsible enough with secret stuff. And keep in mind, it doesn't matter what the classification is at the top of a document. What Pete Hegseth was sharing, if Jeffrey Goldberg's reporting is correct, what he was sharing was specific times, specific weapon systems, and the order of the operation of how this was going to go down. That should not have been shared in Signal, period. End of story. Even if a journalist wasn't in there, it shouldn't have been shared in Signal. It's not a secure enough thing. And we have enemies that are trying to get this information and use it against us. So my point is, I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a Republican. I want people to be held responsible. In my opinion, Mike Waltz should resign because he made the mistake. I think it was just a mistake. I don't think it was nefarious. And obviously, this wasn't them trying to leak stuff to the press or them trying to share national secrets or classified information with people that weren't authorized to see it. But it was a mistake, and I think he should resign for it. I also think Secretary of Defense Austin, back in the Biden administration, should have resigned for going to the hospital and getting a cancer diagnosis and being there for days, AWOL, while no one knew where he was. He should have resigned for that. Biden should have fired him. I'm not saying he did a bad job otherwise. I'm not saying Mike Waltz is doing a bad job otherwise. I actually think he's a pretty smart guy. However, I think you have to take some responsibility at some point. And Donald Trump is famous for saying you're fired to people. That's literally part of the reason he's famous, okay? And he complained in the debate back in June with Joe Biden that Joe Biden doesn't fire anyone. And it was true. It was a really fair part of the debate to say that you've had all these problems and you've never held anyone responsible for them in your administration. Well, here's Donald Trump's chance to hold someone responsible. Mike Waltz should resign. I don't necessarily think he should be fired. It's a mistake. It's a one-time mistake. We do need to have some clarification on what this Signal messaging policy is, and I hope that the Senate Intel Committee actually gets to the bottom of that and says, here's what should and shouldn't happen. It would be nice to see Congress use some of its authority over the executive branch to say, no, this is how things should work from now on. Pete Hegseth, though, should be fired, in my opinion. The reason why he should be fired is because it's not his fault that the journalist was on the thing, but he absolutely cannot be the Secretary of Defense and not know that sharing that information inside of Signal should have not happened. Now, all these other people that were on the call, or not the call, the text thread, I don't understand why none of them ever chimed in and said, hey, this is not the appropriate avenue for this conversation. We need to have this in a skiff or somewhere else. But Pete Hegseth is the one that did it. And this comes back to his judgment as a person. I'm not saying maybe he'll be a good Secretary of Defense. I don't know. But this is a judgment call. His judgment call with women has been bad. And I think this is the same thing. He was so caught up in the moment of it. First of all, he didn't need to share this with these people in real time. There's no need for that. They did this in a skiff or in more private communications that's actually government controlled. And there's no need for it. So I personally think that Pete Hegseth should be fired. He won't be. There will be no consequences for this. My point is we keep excusing it. At one point, this is going to happen where there's going to be a mistake that happens like this or an accident. And by the way, these are all things that anyone lower than these people would be fired for. If you were in the military, you'd be fired. If you worked at the FBI and you did this, you'd be fired. If you worked at the CIA and you did this, you'd be fired. You'd possibly be prosecuted, depending if they thought what your motivations were. People have been prosecuted for this kind of thing. And we've got to take it seriously because there will be a point where this actually bites us. There will be a point where this gets into the wrong hands and causes a problem. And look, if it wasn't Jeffrey Goldberg, what if this had been someone that the second they got the strikes are happening in 2 hours, put it on Twitter and the Houthis knew it was coming? That could have absolutely happened because it's luck that he happened to pick Jeffrey Goldberg, but he could have put any other number in there wrong. We're guessing that he had invited Jeffrey Goldberg for other purposes and then saw JG and they think that I think it's the Commerce Secretary or something that has the same initials. And so you just see the initials if someone doesn't have a picture in Signal. So that's probably what happened. It's just a mistake. But at the highest level of government, when we're dealing with national security, we've got to take that seriously. And I think we have to have some responsibility there. Okay. So on to the RFK story. So RFK Jr. was quoted last week, I guess last Thursday. Kennedy praises cell phone bans in schools, but he wants them to not be available to kids at schools. But the federal government doesn't have any control over this. Actually, this is not something, but he can encourage state and local authorities to do these kind of things. Here's the thing. I actually agree with it. I recently read Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation. There's a lot of, I think, convincing evidence in there that cell phones in schools specifically with adolescents are a problem and that we should not have them and not just not have them out, but like they shouldn't have them on their person. There's all sorts of data on suicide attempts and anxiety and depression and all these things that have shot up since sort of the advent of smartphones and social media specifically. And I think it's pretty convincing. RFK Jr. goes on, I'm like, okay, great. This is actually something I agree with. Maybe we'll get on board. The problem is that RFK Jr. wants to do it because he thinks cell phones cause brain cancer and other kind of cancers. And there's just no evidence that that's the case. So Kennedy cited established links. Let's actually pull this up on screen. Maybe I'll zoom in on that. Okay. So he says Kennedy cited established links between social media use and depression and poor school performance, which is what I was talking about. But he also suggested that cell phones produce electromagnetic radiation, which has been shown to do neurological damage to kids when it's around them all day and to cause cellular damage and even cancer. The problem is no study has actually ever found that. So there are some studies that you can cite. And for example, this is one from the cancer.gov. This is the National Institute of Health. And they have, let me zoom out on that a lot. Okay. So cell phones emit radiation in the radio frequency region of the electromagnetic spectrum. Second, third, and fourth generation cell phones, that's 2G, 3G, and 4G, and we're actually technically on 5G now or whatever, emit radio frequencies in the range of 0.7 to 2.7 gigahertz. Fifth generations are using the frequency spectrum up to 80 gigahertz. These frequencies all fall in the non-ionizing range of the spectrum, which is low frequency and low energy. The energy is too low to damage DNA. By contrast, ionizing radiation, which includes X-rays, radon, and cosmic rays, is high frequency frequency and high energy. Energy from ionizing radiation can damage DNA. DNA damage can cause changes to genes that may increase the risk of cancer. So the thing is, not only, RFK Jr. is famous for these conspiracy theories with zero scientific evidence. And so he's not citing any evidence that shows that cell phones cause cancer. In fact, the government's own cancer research and all the cancer research shows that no, cell phone radiation is not damaging. First of all, even if we didn't have this research that showed that, we've had cell phones now for 30 something years, pretty popular as far as like since the late 90s, almost everyone's had a cell phone and it's been operating in these frequencies, right? So you would think we'd all have some sort of butt cancer at this point, right? Because we're sitting on the phone all day, or we'd have some sort of tumors showing up on the sides of our head that we hold our phone to. Those would be showing up. Like we would have more, and there have been an increase in specifically females in their like 30s and 40s increased cancer, but it's not been the kind of cancer that that RFK Jr. is talking about. So there probably are other environmental causes of those cancers, but there's no evidence that cell phones are one of them. So we don't need to worry about cell phones causing cancer. And that my worry here is that RFK Jr., by attaching this conspiracy theory to it that people are going to push back on, my worry is that people will go, no, that's not a good reason. And then they won't ban cell phones in school. So again, the right idea for the wrong reason. I don't know if I take that as a win or not, because I don't think kids should have cell phones in schools. I think that all the data and all the studies that have ever done this, where they actually make them leave them in their lockers or, where they absolutely have no access to them, that test scores improve, behavior improves, all sorts of things improve when you take that distraction away from kids. And so I'm all for it, but it's because it's a distraction. It's not because it's giving our kids cancer. That's not the reason you shouldn't get your kid a smartphone. You shouldn't get your kid a smartphone because, that's the most likely place they're going to become a victim of some sort of crime is on the internet, frankly. Okay. So I just wish RFK Jr. would stop injecting a conspiracy theory into everything he talks about, even when he's right about something, like the cell phones with kids in school. All right, that's it for me. If you want to hop in the comments below and let me know any questions you have, I'll try to answer them on tomorrow's show. And other than that, I will catch you tomorrow.